Welcome to the January the 28th, 1992 taping of It Happened in Grand Prairie, as we bring you the history of Grand Prairie, Texas and its environs, and also bring to a spotlight some of the people that have caused history to happen in Grand Prairie. We're just so excited today as we do our history tape number 165. And we have with us today Herschel French, and he is very special to Grand Prairie, so we want to welcome you to the set today, Herschel.
Thank you.
You bet. All right, now Herschel, to begin our little interview, we'd like you to look out into your camera and give us your genealogy, give us your parents' names and the names of your brothers and sisters, and tell us a little bit about the young Mr. French. Would you do that? Your parents' names.
I was born on December the 8th, 1914 in Navarro County, Texas, down south of Frost on Navarro Mills Lake. And my father's name was Fred Wesley French. My mother's name was Alice Arlene Selby French. And I was one of three kids. I was the oldest one in the family, and my brother's name is Edwin French. He lives in Fort Worth. He's a veteran of World War II. And my sister's name is Margie Faye Flynn, French Flynn, and she lives in Corsicana and is presently down in Houston with her husband, who's going through a major operation down there. He was a veteran of World War II. Her husband was. His name was Charlie Flynn. I have one son, Herschel French Jr., and he finished school in Grand Prairie through the Grand Prairie school system. He has 4 children, 3 daughters and 1 son, and his son's name is Herschel Fred French III.
Way to go.
We kind of keep the name going.
All right, name those 3 granddaughters,
And
would
the
you?
3 granddaughters is Rhonda and Glenda and Tamitha. And Rhonda has one little girl. We call her Misty, and my other grandkids don't have any children yet. And I have.
You would name your son's wife's name so we could get her into the record, Anna.
Her name is Anna.
Okay.
Anna. And my son's wife's name is Anna.
You named one of your granddaughters and her child, but did you name your other 2 granddaughters? Would you do that?
Well, the three daughters' names is Rhonda and Glenda and Tamitha.
Okay.
Rhonda, Glenda, and Tamitha.
And you have
they all went through
five
school.
greats, right?
I have some great-grandkids by previous marriage, and they are down in Waco.
Down in Waco, Texas.
The thing on that is that they never have been around much, so I don't. They never went through Grand Prairie High School. See, they went.
But your son went to Grand Prairie High School.
All the rest of them went through Grand Prairie High School, and I've saw the school system in Grand Prairie go from 3 buildings to what we got today, and I've been instrumental in trying to get it done so that we'd have some good schools for the kids here in town.
All right. I need to know this. Would you give your wife's mother's and father's name, give your wife's name and her parents?
Well, my wife's name is Monty Faye Carrington French, and her parents are both deceased, and her father's name was Jerome, and her mother's name was, we always called her Mutt. I don't even remember her name.
Okay.
Anyway, they're both deceased. She had some brothers. One of them's deceased now that served in the World War II. She's got a brother down at A&M that we're real proud of named J.B. Carrington, and he served in World War II, and he is now a master of history down at A&M. always was a pretty studious old boy. Rest of them, I can't think of all their names. There was 10 or 12 of them in the family, and some of them's over in Longview, and some of them's out, buried out in Casper, Wyoming, and they just are scattered all over the world.
Navarro County and Frost, and that's where...
Navarro County and Frost. My wife was born at Maypearl.
All right.
That's up closer to Dallas, and her birth certificate's in Ellis County.
All right. Now, when you were growing up as a young man, what did your dad do for a living, Herschel?
Well, my daddy was a farmer, and he was always he was a pretty studious old man. He when he wasn't farming, he was trucking farm products around or moving people or things like that. We lived in Prairie, Texas one time, I remember very well. He made a crop out there in Hill County, and then as soon as the crop was gathered, he bought him 2 14-mile trucks and started driving them around around Irene and hauling cottonseed to the cotton mill over in Hubbard, Texas.
All right. What did Herschel French do as a young man on the farm? Did you have any chores?
Well, I done most of my time on the farm was trying to get out of work, because
I see.
Until my daddy died, he never did make us kids. Well, I was oldest, but I was only 12 years old, and he never did make us do anything except study and go to school, and he'd make us get our lessons at night and things like that, and he'd go on about his business. Well, that was the days before television, before telephones, before radios or anything. So the only thing that we could do at night was study and listen to him tell some of the tales of his childhood, and then go on to bed and get up the next morning and get out and get our face washed, and Mama would feed us and we'd get us off to school. But,
all right, tell me where you went to school as a young man and how you got there.
Well, I went to Irene School. I remember very well the schoolhouse burnt down there, and we went to school in a tabernacle down there across the street, and water would get so high sometimes Daddy'd have to carry me on his back across to the school, and then wearing his hip boots. And then after we moved to up from Axtell, Texas, up close to Waco, well, we lived in town, and I didn't have but about lived in a little place called Prairie Hill, and we'd drive. Mama made him move to town so that I could go to school, and I'd walk about 3 blocks up to school. And then whenever we moved back to Hubbard City, Texas, well, it was about 8 or 10 blocks through town. I'd walk to school there, and went to school 2 years there, and then we moved to Dawson, Texas, and that's where we lived there in Dawson and walked to school for 1 year, and then the next year we moved out on a farm southeast of Dawson, and me and my brother would walk to school there. It was about 6 or 7 miles. Of course, we'd walk across the fields, and it wouldn't be but about 4 miles. And that's where I was going to school when my father passed away, and he passed away one evening when I was coming in from school, and then I started going to a little old town school called Spring Hill. Mr. Will Ray was the teacher, and he taught through the 7th grade, and he was the only teacher we had. And there's me and 3 girls in the senior class of the 7th grade. And whenever I graduated, he says, well, I've taught you all I can teach you. Now, Herschel, you're going to have to go to Dawson. So I went to Dawson, started, and I had to quit and go to work on the farm and my brother and sister kept on going, and they got through high school in Corsicana, Texas. We moved to Corsicana, and they both graduated from Corsicana High School. But I never did get through. I just got to 7th grade, and then after I got in the service and took advantage of the veterans privileges, well, I got my rest of my schoolhousing over at Dallas and around over there.
Okay. When you left the farm and went into the service, you want to talk any about it, where you went and how long you stayed in it?
Whenever I left the farm, went to Corsicana. Well, I worked odd jobs around, worked in garages and things like that around Corsicana, and my mother had remarried a guy by the name of Bankston, and that's whenever I got introduced to Grand Prairie.
I see.
About 1936 or 37, somewhere along there. And he was living up here in Grand Prairie, barbering at a place up here in central part of Grand Prairie on Center Street and Jefferson. And he lived in an old place there where the Grand Prairie Hardware Store is now, as a hotel. And he lived in there, and I looked Grand Prairie over, and it was a country town, and all they had up there in that part of the town, right there where the American Legion's located on South Center, was they had a gin and an old rubber mill there, and they had an interurban track running out to carry people back and forth from Fort Worth to Dallas, running up Jefferson Street. And so I liked the looks of it, but then later on, I went back to, went into the service and come out of the service, and then I come back up here and looked around, and it looked pretty good. So I finally got a job over at Braniff Airways working on airplanes and learning to be a mechanic. And after I got my license, well, then I went back to Corsicana and went to work down there in a airport down there as an inspector. And they got the job done, and the war was over, and so they laid us all off, and I come up and went to work at Luscombe over at Garland for as an inspector, and had a guy over there that me and him didn't gee-haw too well, so I...
Was that Howard LeQuay?
No, that was later on. This is years later.
Years later. Go ahead.
We had a Russian engineer over there that me and him didn't gee-haw on things we was doing, so I got up one morning and decided I'd go hunt me a job, and I told my wife, we was living in an apartment in Garland. I said, I'm gonna go find me another job, and I still had a job. So I drove by Jefferson out here, and Timco was open, and them C-47 tails was sticking up over, and that's what I learned out at Braniff Airways was C-47 airplane. So I went in there and asked old Brown, the guard out there, if anybody needed an A&E mechanic, and he said, are you an A&E? And I said, yep, I wouldn't have asked you if I hadn't have been. So he called J.C. McIlvaine up there, and he come up there and interviewed me, and he said, well, I need you and I want you, but said, I can't pay what you're getting. He said, how much you getting? I told him I was getting $1.35. I was getting $1.15, but I told him I was getting $1.35.
Way to go, Herschel.
So he said he'd have to, he would hire me, but he couldn't pay that. And I said, well, what can you pay? I'm not too happy. He said, I'll give you $1.40. No, he said he'd give me $1.15. I believe he said $1.15. Anyway, I said, okay, I'll take it. So he took me down there in the shop, and I went out in the high bay area, and first thing he done, they had me to inspect an engine on an airplane, and I looked it all over and found 2 or 3 things wrong, and then they fixed it, and then they got it out on the line, and had a guy out there named Lynn Myers was an inspector too, and he was out there with me, and so McIlvaine asked us if we'd fly that airplane for him, because his pilot had tried to gouge him for a $1,000 bonus, and he didn't have the money, so we flew the airplane, and he gave me a raise then back to $1.35, see?
Yes.
Because he said he'd give me and Myers both a raise. So from then on, I worked for McIlvaine as an inspector, and he took leukemia and died, and then I went to work for C.B. Lewis and worked for him until Tony Hannewacker took over, and then I worked for Tony until he transferred me to another guy down there in experimental, and I was traveling for LTV, and by that time Timco had turned into LTV, and so I was traveling for him and going to Edwards and going to out in California a long ways, and in the meantime I had decided that I wanted to be something besides just a roving inspector, so I went to work to learning enough about it till I finally got to be a quality control engineer, and that's when I retired in '82.
1982 from LTV as quality control engineer. That is some jump from the farm down in near Irene in Navarro County. And I'd like to ask you this. Now, Herschel, you've told us all around the mulberry bush about you, but how did you meet Monty Fay?
Oh,
and where?
I was down in Corsicana. We was during the Depression, and us old boys down there, we'd work any way we could get. So I was working in a hamburger joint down there, frying hamburgers at night for an old boy named Blind Pete. And he had a little old hole-in-the-wall hamburger joint, and I was working nights for him. And she came strutting by there one day with a girl, and I liked her looks. And so I asked one of the girls I was working with what her name was, and they said her name was Mary. Well, her sister's name was Mary, but she told me her name was Mary, this old gal did. So next time she come by, I started flirting with her and I'd calling her Mary and trying to buy a hamburger, and her sister was with her named Mary, and Mary thought I was talking to her.
Oh, my.
But anyway, I finally got it all straightened out, and then I started hitting on her just like any young man will, and finally she started going to picture show with me, and then as I say, I was working, didn't think I'd get, and then I'd take trips driving a truck off to haul watermelons to Fort Worth and things, and finally in the meantime, I'd been in the National Guards for a long time, since 1936, see, and that was only 1 day a week, so we got mobilized and sent to Camp Bowie, and so she come out there to Camp Bowie to visit me, and finally we decided that we were going to get married before the war started. So I went and one day I come home from Camp Bowie and borrowed a car from an old boy, and me and her got in the car and went over to Athens, Texas, and got us a marriage license. Went down there to a preacher named Maples, and went in. And I told him we wanted to get married, so he married us up. That's the way we got married and the way we met and everything.
Oh, that's exciting. All right, now coming to Grand Prairie, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your service in the American Legion, because recently you were honored, in the last year, you were honored for 50 years of service in the American Legion. And since we're getting down to about 6 or 7 or 8 minutes left in this interview, we must touch on the American Legion and your service in the Masonic Lodge. So let's get to the American Legion first, shall we?
Well, the American Legion is a veterans organization. It was formed in 1918 by World War I boys. And I want everybody in the world to know that the World War I boys is the one done it. And if they hadn't got it done, before the American Legion was formed, the veterans didn't have anybody representing them in Washington. Whenever the war is over, they'd kick you out and give you one piece of equipment and tell you to head for home. And they even done that in the Civil War. And in World War II, they done that. So the boys, World War I veterans, got together. Teddy Roosevelt Jr. was the one that started the ball rolling, and you can find that information in this book right here if you'll bother to read it.
The American Legion Story by Raymond Motley Jr., right? Okay.
And,
go ahead.
He called a convention in Brest, France, and I might be wrong, it might have been Paris, France, but he called a convention there just to tell the people that he wanted to try to organize a veterans organization.
I want you to clue in more on the American Legion in Grand Prairie, Texas, rather than extensive using up your time for the history of this, because we're really interested in Grand Prairie.
American Legion in Grand Prairie, in Texas, when I first become associated with it in 1946, but I joined the American Legion in '42.
All right.
Whenever there was a service officer of the American Legion in Corsicana, Texas, asked me, he says, "Hey, I see you back in my service." Said, "Did you get you mustering out benefits?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" So he explained it to me, and we filled out all the forms and sent them in, and I got my mustering out pay and everything, which the boys get automatically now. But they didn't give it to me when I come out of the 36th Division. 36th Division is the one I was in. It was a Texas division, and we was at Camp Bowie, Texas. Well, got it all straightened out, and it put me thinking. The American Legion does some things for people around here that should be taken care of by some paid official, but they're doing it anyway. So I joined the American Legion, and I was just on the rolls, paying $6 a month a year to belong to the American Legion, but my voice was there. So when I left Corsicana and come to Love Field, I transferred the membership up to Love Field to the John Lowe Joe Smart post. And after all that stuff I told you a while ago about how I got to Grand Prairie, well, after I come to Grand Prairie and went to work moved out here and bought out here and everything and settled out here, well, I was joined the Grand Prairie Police Reserves, and I was riding one night with a sergeant up here, and he was commander of the American Legion in Grand Prairie.
How great.
So he asked me, why wouldn't I join the American Legion? I said, I'd already belonged to the American Legion. He said, well, transfer your membership out here so we can have you on our rolls. So I did. Well, the meetings I went to, when they come up for election officers, well, they elected me as first vice commander, and he was still commander. It was Bill Lynch who it was.
You all right?
And I couldn't come to meetings quite a bit, so I got interested in it. And Joe Cooper was a service officer at the time, and Ira Couch was the adjutant. And he'd been working in it for years, and he'd built this building. They moved this building up here from on South Center Street, from out there on the hill where this new bank is, this Nations Bank is now. There used to be an airport out there called Lufwood Airport. Well, they'd moved that building down here and set it up, and they was working diligently. The Stoffel-Beams and the Motleys and all of them was working hard on it, and your daddy was part of it. He was working on it. J.L. Thompson, he was commander there along about the time that they started moving this building. Well, when I come to this post, well, then I started filling in for Bill Lynch. Well, the next year they elected me commander.
Way to go.
So I started recruiting. I was a roving inspector out the plant and had access to the whole plant, and I was on the bicycle, so I'd go around and I'd recruit it, and I built this post up to 200 members in less than a year's time. Well, went on, and I got transferred to California, and old man Couch died, and some of the other officers died, and there wasn't nobody working, and I come back here from my assignment in California for Vought and made a meeting, and there wasn't but 3 people there, me and Joe Caldwell and Sam Brown. And I asked what was wrong. I looked to see the roster, and we had 35 members. So I called 5th District Adjutant, and he sent a man over here from Fort Worth named Cloyd Penson, who was a retired Air Force captain, and he come over here and took the bull by the horns, and we started recruiting, and we've got that post built back up to about 150 members. What American Legion does for a community, the people hardly ever know it. But we send boys to Boys State, send girls to Girls State. We sponsor Boy Scout teams, and we also help out destitute veterans that have trouble getting food on their table, or getting a place to bury themselves, or getting in the hospital or something like that. And incidentally, they elected me service officer about, well, when I come back from California in '82. And I've been a service officer ever since. And service officer's duties is more or less a lawyer for a veteran. And all veterans should belong to some veterans organization, preferably. I belong to all of them, but I belong to the DAV and the Veterans of Foreign Wars and American Legion and the AMVETS and the 36th Division Association and everything. But all veterans should belong to some organization so that he can put his name on the rolls and put his due fees in, because that's the only place to get any money is from the dues, so that he can perpetuate this thing and keep the American Legion alive. It's going to die by the numbers if some youngsters don't get a hold of it. And if they want to call me at 263-1457 and ask for an application, I'll be glad to come to them and give it to them.
That sounds exciting. Now, as a service officer, you also have other responsibilities, because I know you've been to probably every school in the city of Grand Prairie and probably in the surrounding area, giving flag protocol and burning of the flag in a proper manner, and we're just so proud of you, Herschel French, for, as you said, Cloyd Pinson took the bull by the horns. You really have raised the image of the flag in the estimation of the boys and girls in Grand Prairie because of your service. Comment about 2 minutes on that.
Well, what thing of it is on this flag deal, when I retired in '82, I read every book that Lewis Lamore had ever written, and I run out of something to do, and having been a roving inspector at the plant and a very active person, I was driving around town seeing if there's something I could do for the town, and I found flags flying upside down, and had flags crushed and everything else. So I went to the superintendent of the schools at the time and asked him if he thought he could come up with any idea that we could get this straightened out. He says, well, said, I can tell them, but said, what we need to do is set up a program so we can educate them. So he gave a letter to all the principals in town saying that I was the flag guru around Grand Prairie.
And that is true.
And I started passing out pamphlets in all the schools and talking to classes when they'd invite me, to the teachers that invite me, telling them about protocol of the flag, how the flag should be cared for, and how the flag could be interned and things like that. And got it going, and I kept grades on it. I set up charts on it, and every time I'd go by a flag that wasn't doing right, I'd go in and give them a talking to, and I'd grade them. And at the end of the school year, it was pretty hard to do because most of them did comply with the rules. I would look at my grades and everything, and I'd give the school a flag that had flown over the capital of the United States. And incidentally, back in the starting of this thing, before I got started on it, I tried to get somebody into it that had some power, and Martin Frost is our chairman of this thing, and he authorizes me to do this, and he's authorizing me today to present you a flag from the United States that's flown over the Capitol. And
how
there's a book there
wonderful.
telling you how to do it. And that's about all I do on the flags, except I could talk for another hour, but I ain't got time.
Well, it's been wonderful having you with us on the show today, Herschel French. I'm so glad you finally decided that you would give us 30 minutes of your very valuable time, because we know you do great works in the Masonic Order, also for the American Legion, also for your church down in Navarro County, and for your wonderful family. And publicly, we want to commend you for your wonderful service to the city of Grand Prairie and to the community, and want to thank you for sharing the show with us today.
Thank you, Ruthie.
Wonderful. And this is Ruthie Jackson reminding you that history is as we live and do.